Global warming, global climate change, these are a couple terms that you hear all the time by the news media, politicians, perhaps by your teachers, or even by your parents. And anytime these terms are brought up, there's another term that you hear, the greenhouse effect. It's the greenhouse effect. That's why the earth is warming up, the greenhouse effect. We have to stop the greenhouse effect. But what is the greenhouse effect? What does that term even mean? Well, before I explain that, I'm going to explain to you what a real greenhouse is. People design these structures, and unlike this bowl, the structures are generally made to look like houses. But the main concept is that the whole structure is predominantly made out of glass. The ceiling, the walls, the whole thing is made out of glass. And within these structures, people put various types of plants. And the idea is that sunlight is allowed to come through the glass. It warms up, say, the floor, or maybe tables, or other things that are inside of the greenhouse. Warms it up. And when the heat comes off the ground or off those tables, that heat gets trapped within the greenhouse, and so provides a good warm environment for the plants to grow. Well, okay, so we know that light could come through glass really easily, as the light's coming through the glass through this window that I'm looking through, and so kind of blinding my sight. But how does that work? Why is it that light can travel through glass and we could see that light, but once the light hits the ground and is absorbed, comes off as heat, we can't see it anymore? What happens there? This next part is a bit confusing, for we normally think of light moving in a straight line, but unfortunately that's not the case, and rather light moves more like a wave, like the ripples in this water. It's this odd zigzag-like pattern, but don't let that confuse you too much. Just let it be known that although light does move in a wave, it doesn't always move with the same wavelength. That means that the zigzag pattern could change. So once light comes through the glass, for example, in the greenhouse and hits the floor, is absorbed and comes off as heat, the zigzag pattern changes, the wavelength changes, and so that light is no longer able to escape out through the glass. Okay, so we learned a couple things here. One, that the movement of light, the wavelength, that isn't always the same, that it could change if it hits something or if it's absorbed by something. And because of that change in wavelength, we can always see light. That's why light, when it comes through the glass and it's absorbed and then re-emitted off the ground as heat, we can't see it because the wavelength changes. Our eyes can only see at certain wavelengths, so if that wavelength changes, even if a little bit, we can't see it anymore. But what does all this have to do with the greenhouse effect and with Earth warming up? Well, in the atmosphere, there's gas, just like there's gas inside of this tea. That's where these bubbles come from. Gas gets trapped inside of a liquid, and that forms little bubbles. The problem is that the gases are in the atmosphere, or certain ones, like carbon dioxide, for example, act kind of like the glass sheets in the greenhouse. They allow sunlight to come through, but when that sunlight turns into heat after it hits the ground and is absorbed and radiated off, it can no longer escape the atmosphere, just like the heat in the greenhouse can't get out. And so because that heat is trapped within inside the Earth eventually warms up. So imagine more greenhouse gases being like a bunch of sheets in the sky. The more sheets of glass that there are in the sky, light could obviously still come in, but that's more heat that gets trapped. So more heat that gets trapped, the hotter the Earth gets. And that's the greenhouse effect.